Have you ever built a dream with someone, only to realize one day they never saw you as part of its success? I never thought I'd be the kind of woman to sit here and tell the story of a broken marriage on the internet. But some stories need to be told, because if we don't speak up, people will always assume we were just the shadow behind someone else's spotlight. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 45 years old and live in a small town near Burlington, Vermont. I used to be a cybersecurity specialist for a major tech firm in Seattle, until the day I packed everything up and left that career behind to help my husband, Daniel, build a small financial startup. He was great at pitching and charming investors. I was the one who built the systems, managed the data, and handled risk control. We used to joke that he was the face of the company and I was the brain. But over the years I started to notice, this brain didn't appear on the company letterhead, wasn't invited to press interviews, and was nowhere to be found on the equity agreements. I still remember those early days clearly, back when our office was a rented space with 2 part-time employees. Daniel was overwhelmed. He had no clue how to design a proper financial model. I stayed up night after night, coding our very first cash flow tracking system. I pulled $30,000 from my retirement savings just to make payroll, while Daniel was out having dinner with potential investors. One year he showed up nearly 2 hours late to my birthday dinner. And still, he walked in smiling. I just closed a $500,000 seed deal. See, we're really doing this. I smiled back, even though the frosting on the cake had already melted. Back then I believed it was worth it. Eventually we got an office in Boston, hired more staff, built a full sales and marketing team. Daniel started dressing better, attending conferences. And me? I stepped further back. I worked from home to take care of our daughter. I did the bookkeeping, managed the files, and fixed server issues at 2 a.m. if I had to. People called me the CEO's wife. No one ever asked, "What do you do at the company?" And yes, that hurt. But at the time I told myself, it's okay. As long as he knows, that's enough. That was my biggest mistake. When you stay in the background too long, people start to believe you're no longer there. Worse, the person you've been supporting may start to believe that too. I can't pinpoint exactly when Daniel changed. Maybe it was after we landed the series of funding. Or maybe it was when he hired Melissa, a young woman with a smile that made everyone feel like they mattered. All I know is the calls became less frequent. He stopped asking for my input on data strategy. Dinner time turned into quiet meetings between me and empty chairs. The lesson I've learned? Love doesn't always die in a big argument. Sometimes it just fades away when someone stops seeing you as someone of value. I'm not telling this story for pity or sympathy. I'm sharing it because I know there are so many women like me. Women who stepped back so someone else could move forward. And we thought that was normal, that it was right. But here's the truth. When you give up your rightful place in a shared dream, you lose your voice when someone decides to erase you from the picture. And yes, I once let that happen. But only once. Because just a few weeks later, on an ordinary morning at a quiet little cafe downtown, Daniel called me. And the first thing he said was not, "I miss you." The coffee, the call, and the calm. I always thought the worst breakups came after a huge fight, or some awful irreversible words. But mine came through a phone call that lasted less than 2 minutes. That morning in Vermont was cool, the kind of crisp early fall air that made the cappuccino in my hands feel extra warm. I was sitting in a little cafe I often went to on weekends, finishing the draft of a business plan to reopen my design studio. An old dream I had shelved not long after getting married. My phone buzzed. Daniel's name lit up the screen. He hadn't called at this time of day in a long while. I answered. His voice was low, hesitant, but steady like he had rehearsed it. "Emily, I'm calling to tell you. I want a divorce." I said nothing, just held my cup tighter, eyes still focused on the golden red leaves swirling just outside the window. "I've sold the company," he added, as if that part was more important. And then one final blow. "Melissa and we're moving to San Diego. We're starting over." Melissa. The name didn't shock me. There was no thunderclap, no shattered coffee cup. Just a name I'd seen mentioned a few too many times in internal emails. And slowly, she had become a regular attendee in meetings I was mysteriously left out of. I placed my cup down on the table. "Congratulations. I replied so calmly I barely recognized my own voice. There was a pause on the other end. Then Daniel let out a short laugh, somewhere between smug and surprised. I didn't think you'd take it this well, Em. Don't you get it? You have nothing left. I own the company. Everything's signed and sealed. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. You're out. I glanced at my watch. 7 more minutes until my meeting with my attorney. I simply said, then maybe you should double-check. And I hung up. Not because I was upset, but because I knew that everything he thought he had taken was never really his to begin with. Have you ever sat silently while someone told you something they thought would break you, only to realize you actually felt lighter? After that call, I didn't cry. I drove straight to Linda's office, my personal attorney, carrying copies of every contract Daniel didn't know I had quietly archived. Shareholder agreements with board signatures, recordings of financial calls, and most importantly, a formal objection to an illegal sale, ready to be submitted to the Securities and Exchange Commission. Daniel thought I was just his wife. He forgot I was also the one who built the company's entire security framework. I built the gate, and I never handed over all the keys. Real example, I once uncovered a technical consulting contract worth nearly $400,000, signed by Daniel and paid to a company in Delaware, registered under Melissa's name. The problem? That company didn't actually exist. I had been watching things like this for a while. I didn't say anything, not because I was scared but because I wasn't ready yet. Not to retaliate, but to reveal the truth. The lesson I learned? Don't let your calm be mistaken for weakness. Some women don't speak up, not because they're passive but because they're preparing. Meticulously. That afternoon when I got home, the sunlight still lingered through the trees. I opened my laptop and logged into the internal financial tracking system, the one Daniel thought he had locked me out of. One recent transaction caught my eye. Over $1.2 million, being quietly funneled to an offshore account. I hit the block button. The account froze instantly. The quiet watcher who documented everything. They say women don't always catch betrayal through hard evidence. Sometimes they just feel it. And more often than not, that instinct is more accurate than any security camera. I didn't start suspecting Daniel because of a photo or a flirty text. I noticed it when he came home late, but no longer looked tired. When he took phone calls in front of me, but spoke just a little too softly. When his meetings with investors started happening without any follow-up reports or updates. I didn't confront him, not because I was afraid, but because I wanted to be sure. Because an accusation without proof? That's too easy to dismiss as a jealous wife's imagination. So I quietly went back to a skill I hadn't used in years. The one I left behind when I walked away from my career in cybersecurity. I rebuilt an internal monitoring system, silently integrated into the company's data management platform. The same platform I had originally designed. No one noticed. No one even thought I still had the ability to do something like that. I didn't spy on Daniel's private messages. I monitored the digital footprint he left behind. Money flow, transactions, contracts, IP addresses used to access the company's servers. And slowly the irregularities started to appear. There was a $400,000 investment consulting contract sent to a Delaware-based company, registered under the name Melissa Quinn. There were a series of small, consistent withdrawals from the company's internal fund, each one transferred to an account ending in .Kentucky. Cayman Islands, if you're wondering. And then there was an email from Daniel to a London broker. Push the valuation up by 15%. I'll take care of the rest. I saved everything. Every file. Every screenshot. Every audio recording of private Zoom calls Daniel thought were secure. Each piece of evidence was encrypted, timestamped, and backed up on an offline hard drive only I could access. I didn't send anything right away. Not because I hesitated, but because timing is everything. A real-life example? One night around 2 a.m., my system flagged an alert. A large transaction was being sent overseas. I got out of bed, sat in the dark, my hand on the mouse. One click, and the transfer was blocked. Daniel never knew. But that night, he lost his chance to move nearly $1.3 million. The lesson I learned? Some betrayals don't come in the form of cheating. They come in silence. When someone quietly erases your name from everything you built together. And some forms of justice don't need to be loud. They just need to be exact and right on time. I know some people might say I went too far. Or that I should have just left sooner, instead of tracking him. But let me ask you this. If the person who once held your hand is now quietly removing you from every page of your shared story, can you really walk away without looking back? Have you ever chosen to silently observe instead of confront, because you knew that truth only counts when it's backed by proof? After 3 months, I had everything I needed. Not just to stop him from selling the company, but to reveal what he'd really been doing for the past year. I didn't call the media. I didn't post it online. I sent the files to my attorney Linda, and to Marcus, a former colleague who now worked as a financial crime investigator. 3 days later, Marcus called me. Emily, what you've compiled. It's enough to launch an SEC investigation. And if everything checks out, the IRS and even the FBI may get involved. I thanked him, hung up, and turned toward the window. Outside, snow had just begun to fall. The night everything fell apart for him. Some nights start like any other, but become the beginning of the end for an empire built on lies. That evening, I wore a simple black dress and picked up the folder I had prepared weeks ago. Outside, snow was falling in soft sheets, and the wind slipped through the cracks in the windows. But I didn't feel cold. Strangely, after all the years of sacrifice and silence, I was finally about to speak the truth, in a language Daniel once believed I had forgotten. Ownership, equity, business ethics. I went to our old house, now the home he shared with Melissa. They were hosting a small party to celebrate a new beginning. I didn't announce my arrival. I stepped in just as the music faded. Daniel stood by the bar holding a glass of red wine, the light catching the rim like he'd just closed another deal. Melissa stood beside him, smiling, but her eyes betrayed her unease the moment she saw me. Emily. Daniel raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. I thought you understood by now. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I placed a leather folder on the table and opened it. Inside were copies of contracts, wire transfers, shareholder records, and a signed legal complaint. I figured I should be here for the goodbye party, I said calmly. After all, I'm the one deciding how this story ends. Daniel chuckled, but it wasn't the confident laugh I once knew. He pulled a page from the stack, skimmed it, then frowned. Melissa glanced at him, then at me. Her face was draining of color. I pointed to a highlighted clause in the document. According to the 2017 shareholder agreement, no equity transfer is valid without the written approval of all majority stakeholders. And I looked Daniel straight in the eye. As of now, I own 62% of the company. I bought it back. From the very people you neglected while chasing parties and new beginnings. Real example? One of those early investors, a woman named Aunt Sylvia, an older supporter who had believed in me since day one. I called her last month, told her the truth. She sold her entire stake to me, with one quiet sentence. Don't let them think you're just the woman behind the coffee tray. Daniel froze. Melissa, who had been leaning lightly against him, took a step back. You told me you had full control, she whispered. You said the company was yours, Daniel. I smiled. Seems he didn't tell you everything either. She stormed out. The door slammed hard enough to shake the chandelier. Daniel turned to me, his face flushed red with rage. What do you want, Emily? Revenge. I shook my head. No. I want justice. And you need to face the consequences. I pulled out another folder, filled with evidence. Money laundering. Transfers to fake shell companies. This packet goes to the SEC and the IRS first thing tomorrow. They'll know exactly what you've been doing. Daniel's hands trembled, and for the first time in years, I felt no fear in his presence. The lesson I learned? Women aren't weak because they choose silence. Sometimes they're just gathering every piece of truth, waiting for the right moment to lay it down. And when they do, there's no flipping the board anymore. Have you ever prepared so thoroughly that the person who once underestimated you has nothing left to say but silence? If you have, share your story, because sometimes your voice is exactly what someone else needs to find their own. Daniel didn't say another word. I packed up my files, stood and walked out. The snow was still falling, But for the first time in years, my heart felt light. From ashes to empire, but not for revenge. Someone once asked me, "Did you go through all that just for revenge?" I smiled. Because the truth is, if revenge was my only goal, I could have walked away the moment Daniel came under investigation. I had enough proof, enough reason, enough fire to bring the whole empire crashing down and leave. But I didn't leave. I chose to stay, to rebuild. 2 weeks after the investigation, our former company, Harrison Finance, was officially suspended. Daniel's name made headlines for all the wrong reasons: financial fraud, offshore accounts, federal violations. The media called it Boston's biggest fintech collapse of the year. I renamed the company North Lantern Technologies, inspired by an old lantern my father used when working late on the farm. Its light was small, but steady, and always showed the way forward. We pivoted into financial security and enterprise data protection, fields I knew better than anyone, because I had been living in that world long before we even had a real office. A real-world example? In the first 3 months, I signed a contract with a local bank chain, the same one that once hesitated, thinking we lacked technical depth. Now they knew who really built the system's core. Then came a major deal with a tech firm in Chicago, because their CTO happened to be my classmate back when I studied cybersecurity. "You were the best in the class," he told me during the signing. "Now our whole team needs you." I didn't build a new empire out of bitterness. I built it from everything that had once been overlooked: patience, preparation, quiet leadership. I used to think I was only meant to stand behind the scenes, but I've come to learn, you don't need noise to lead. You just need clarity and integrity. One afternoon, when things had started settling into place, I got a message from my daughter. "Mom, I'm proud of you. Not because you won, but because you never had to hurt anyone to prove your strength." I read that line over and over. The lesson I learned? Truth doesn't need to shout to be heard. It just needs to stand firm and move with intention. Sometimes the most powerful kind of victory doesn't come from proving someone wrong. It comes from living right, from staying grounded in who you are, even when others forget your worth. If you're in a season where it feels like everything's falling apart, don't assume that's the end. Sometimes that moment of loss is exactly what leads you to something greater than you ever dared to imagine. Have you ever lost something you thought was everything, only to realize it helped you finally find yourself? So, share your story, because maybe, just maybe, your story is the light someone else has been waiting for, just like you once were. Today, I'm no longer the CEO's wife. I'm the founder, the one in front, the one on the stage, under the spotlight, no longer needing to lower her gaze to make others feel comfortable. And I'm telling this story not to glorify myself, but so that you know, quiet strength, grounded in truth, can take you anywhere. If you've ever been the woman behind someone else's dream, someone else's name, someone else's voice, stay with this channel. This is where we tell the real stories of pain quietly carried and strength quietly reclaimed. One little subscribe button may not seem like much, but to me, it's your way of saying, I'm here, I'm listening, and I want to hear more of what hasn't been told. And I'll be right here, telling it all, one story at a time.